Telling my dad I'm changing my name and that I don't exist to be the reincarnation of his mother? My name is Rain, though that wasn't always the case. For 27 years, everyone around me called me Lorraine, a name that was never really mine to begin with, a name I inherited like a haunting. My father's mother, my grandmother, had passed away just a month before my mom found out she was pregnant with me. And when the doctor told them I was a girl, my dad didn't even hesitate. Lorraine, he said, it's meant to be. I grew up in the shadow of a woman I never met, a woman whose pictures hung in our hallway, whose name was stitched into the fabric of every family story. I remember being 5, sitting cross-legged on the living room carpet, listening to my dad and his brothers tell stories about her, how she laughed, how she cooked, how she was the heart of the family. They'd look at me with soft smiles, saying, "You look just like her." And back then, it felt nice, like I was part of something sacred. I used to trace the outlines of her face in old photographs, noticing how her curls fell in the same way mine did, how her smile tilted the same way. I'd mimic the way she stood in pictures, her hands folded politely in front of her, her chin slightly lifted. "Grandma would be so proud of you," Dad would whisper whenever I got good grades or helped Mom set the table, and I'd beam, not realizing how deep those words would someday cut. As I grew, so did the ghost of her inside me. Every decision I made seemed to echo hers. Every compliment was filtered through the lens of her. I wasn't just Lorraine, I was her second chance, but I didn't know that yet. It started as love. Then, slowly, it turned into expectation. When I was 13, I decided I didn't want to take piano lessons anymore. I'd been doing it since I was 6, and honestly, I was terrible. My dad didn't take it well. He said, "Your grandmother loved the piano. She used to play every Sunday. You can't just give it up." I remember staring at him, the weight of disappointment heavy in his voice. "But I don't like it," I whispered. He looked at me like I'd betrayed someone sacred. Lorraine would have never said that. That was the first time I realized he wasn't talking to me. He was talking to her, and it didn't stop there. When I hit high school, I wanted to try art instead of music. He frowned. When I cut my hair a little shorter, my uncles gasped like I'd desecrated a shrine. Every hobby, every outfit, every dream I chased, it was compared to what Grandma would have done. My father had built an invisible cage out of nostalgia, and I didn't even know I was trapped inside it. But college changed everything. Choosing my major was the first real battle. I wanted to study environmental design, architecture that helped restore damaged landscapes. My dad wanted me to go into education, like your grandmother did. He even pulled out her old yearbooks, showing me her class photos, the notes her students wrote about her. He wanted me to follow her footsteps like a script written decades before I was born, but I couldn't. When I told him I'd already committed to my college and major, he didn't speak to me for a week. When he finally did, he said something I'll never forget. "You're letting her down. Her, not me, not his daughter, but the woman buried 10 miles away." That night, I sat in my dorm room, staring at the mirror, wondering if he ever really saw me at all. I'd always thought my name was a connection, but now it felt like a chain. It got worse the more I tried to pull away. The more I changed, the more he clung to the image he'd built of me. When I dyed my hair darker during my sophomore year, he looked at me like a stranger. "Your grandmother would never have done that," he said. I wanted to scream, "Well, I'm not her," but the words stuck in my throat. It wasn't until I started therapy that I began to untangle it all. My therapist looked at me one afternoon, her pen hovering above her notebook, and said quietly, "It sounds like your father never really let his mother go. And somewhere along the way, he started seeing her in you." I sat there in silence, my hands trembling. "He didn't raise his daughter," she continued softly. "He tried to raise her ghost." That's when it hit me. Every compliment, every comparison, every Lorraine would be proud. It wasn't love. It was grief disguised as devotion. And I'd spent my whole life performing a role I never auditioned for, so I decided to stop. It started small. I began using the nickname some college friends had given me years before, Rain. It felt like a breath of air after years underwater, light, free, mine. But when I told my dad, he looked at me like I'd just erased his mother from existence. The first time I told my dad that my friends called me Rain, I thought he might laugh. Maybe he'd tease me about how college kids always have some nickname. Instead, his face went cold. He stared at me like I'd just spat on my grandmother's grave. "Rain?" he repeated, the word dripping with disbelief. "You're named Lorraine, after your grandmother. You should be proud of that." I smiled nervously. "I know, Dad. It's shorter. Everyone calls me that now. I kind of like it." He folded his arms. "Well, I don't. You'll always be Lorraine." My Lorraine. Those two words, my Lorraine, echoed through my chest like a lock clicking shut. I realized then that every attempt I made to step away only made him tighten his grip. From that day, something shifted between us. At every family gathering, he'd introduce me as Lorraine, forcing the name out with extra weight, as if saying it could anchor me to the identity he refused to lose. My uncles followed suit, pretending not to hear when my friends or fiancé called me Rain. Sometimes I'd catch my father watching me across the table, not like a proud parent, but like a man studying an old photograph that's fading too fast. He'd tell me stories about Grandma again, except now they felt like warnings. "You know, your grandmother always dressed conservatively. She believed a woman's dignity was in her presentation." Or, "Your grandmother loved hosting dinners. She said a home's warmth was shown by how you fed people." And every time there was an unspoken unlike you hanging in the air. I tried to push through it. I told myself he'd come around, but the truth is, every change I made, every haircut, every outfit, every decision became an act of rebellion in his eyes. Then came the day I dyed my hair. It was just a rich auburn, something I'd wanted for years, a simple change really. But when I came home for the holidays that winter, Dad took one look at me and his face twisted into something I'd never seen before. Grief and anger fused together. "What have you done?" he whispered. "It's just hair, I said, forcing a laugh. I thought it'd be fun. He stepped closer, shaking his head. Your grandmother had hair like gold. She took pride in it. And now you— Now I what? I snapped. Now I don't look like your dead mother anymore? The words were out before I could stop them. Silence fell heavy over the room. My mom's fork clattered against her plate. My uncles stared, mouths half open. Dad's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't the kind that came from love. They were the kind that came from loss. He didn't say another word that night. After dinner, I sat alone in my childhood bedroom, the walls still covered in framed pictures of her. Not one of them was of me. Not a single photo from college or even high school graduation had replaced those old black and white portraits. It felt like living in a mausoleum built for someone else's memories. That night, I decided I was done. In therapy, my counselor had asked me once, if you stripped away everything your father expects of you, who would you be? At the time, I didn't know how to answer. But as I stared at my reflection in that mirror, auburn hair catching the soft glow of my bedside lamp, I finally understood. I'd be Rain. The name felt like renewal. A quiet rebellion, yes, but also a reclamation. For the first time, I felt like I belonged to myself. Still, my father didn't see it that way. He saw it as betrayal. When I told him I was engaged, he smiled, really smiled, for the first time in years. He said, your grandmother would have loved your fiancé. I didn't correct him. I was too tired. But then, when he asked if I'd be keeping our family name after marriage, I hesitated. I told him gently, no, I'm taking his last name. I want our family, our future kids, to share one. He went quiet. His eyes darted down, then up again. So you'll be erasing the last piece of your grandmother from your name? I tried to explain, Dad, I'm not erasing her. I'll always carry her in my middle name. But I also need space to be me. That's when I told him about my plan to legally change my first name to Rain. For a moment, he just stared. Then his expression crumbled into disbelief, then fury. You're doing this to spite me. No, I said softly. I'm doing this to free myself. Free yourself from what? His voice broke. From love? From family? No, I whispered. From being a ghost. He looked at me as if I'd stabbed him. And maybe, in a way, I had. He shouted something about betrayal, about how I'd never understand until he was gone, until he was the ghost haunting someone else's name. Then he stormed out, leaving the door half open, his shadow trembling in the hallway light. I sat there in the quiet, my heart pounding like it wanted out of my chest. For years, I'd tried to be the daughter he wanted, but that night, I realized something painful. I could never be, because the daughter he wanted wasn't me. She was a memory. A woman who'd lived, loved, and died long before I was even born. My dad didn't speak to me for 3 days after that night. 3 days of silence that felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. Mom tried to smooth things over. That's what she always did. She called me the next morning, her voice soft but strained. You really hurt him, Rain, she said, testing the name like it might burn her tongue. He feels like he's losing you. I closed my eyes, pressing the phone to my ear. He's not losing me, Mom. He's losing the version of me he invented. She sighed. You know your father doesn't mean to hurt you. He just misses her. I know, I said quietly. But I'm not her replacement. There was a long pause. Then she said, maybe not. But maybe you could have been gentler about it. Her words stung because part of me wondered if she was right. I had snapped. I'd thrown years of frustration at him all at once. And maybe I'd wounded him in ways I couldn't see. But how gentle could I be after spending my whole life whispering through someone else's shadow? After that call, the silence between us turned into distance. Texts went unanswered. My calls went to voicemail. Holidays were awkward. My dad would talk around me, not to me. If he did address me directly, he'd use Lorraine every single time with sharp precision. It was like he was trying to resurrect me through language. I tried to make peace in small ways. I sent him photos of my fiancé and me planning our wedding, hoping he'd see that I was happy. But every response came back curt. She'd love that venue, he'd write. Your grandmother always dreamed of a wedding like that. It wasn't about me. It never had been. Still, I couldn't shake the guilt. Every time I saw him look at me with that hollow pain in his eyes, I felt like I'd taken something precious from him. And maybe I had. Maybe the illusion of his mother living through me was the only thing that made him feel close to her. Maybe I'd broken that fragile tether. But how long was I supposed to live a life that wasn't mine just to protect his grief? One night, about a month later, I found myself flipping through an old family album. The smell of dust and paper filled the room, and there she was, my grandmother, Lorraine, smiling beside my grandfather in a faded photograph. Her hair was soft and wavy, her eyes bright with a kind of timeless warmth. For the first time, I didn't feel resentment when I looked at her. I felt empathy. I whispered to the picture, you didn't ask for this either, did you? She didn't. She was just a woman who'd lived her life, loved her family, and left the world like everyone eventually does. It was my father who'd turned her memory into a monument, and then chained me to it. That realization hit harder than I expected. In therapy, I tried to explain the strange guilt that lingered. My therapist nodded slowly and said, you're grieving too, Rain. You're grieving the relationship you wish you had with your father, the one where he saw you for who you are. That night, I cried harder than I had in years. It was the kind of crying that doesn't come with sound, just waves of shaking breath and salt on your lips. Because she was right. I wasn't just losing him. I was losing the idea of what he could have been to me. The next time we spoke, it was 2 months later, when I called to tell him about the wedding date. He picked up after the third ring. His voice was weary. I already heard from your mother, he said. Yeah, I replied softly. I just wanted to tell you myself. A long silence followed. Then he said, are you still planning to change your name? Yes. Another pause. And the last name too? Yes, Dad. He exhaled sharply. So that's it then. The last piece of your grandmother, gone. I felt my chest tighten. Dad, that's not fair. I'm not erasing her memory. I just don't want to live as her anymore. She was you, he said, his voice cracking. When you were born, it was like she came back. I could see her eyes, her smile, everything I lost. And now you're killing her all over again. I bit my lip until I tasted blood. No, Dad, I whispered. You're the one who's been keeping her from resting. He didn't respond, just the soft click of the phone hanging up. That was 6 months ago. He hasn't spoken to me since. Some nights I dream of him, sitting at the old piano, the one my grandmother used to play, his fingers trembling over the keys but never pressing them. The house is quiet, filled with dust and ghosts, and he looks up at me with tears in his eyes, whispering, Lorraine, please don't go. But I already have. And yet, despite the silence, despite the ache, a strange peace has begun to settle inside me. For the first time, I feel like I'm living my life, not the one he wanted for me. I think that's what freedom feels like. Not joy exactly, but space. Space to breathe. Space to exist without apology. Still, every time I sign my new name, Rain, a tiny part of me wonders if he'll ever call me that, even once before he's gone. The morning of my wedding dawned with a sky that couldn't make up its mind. Part sunlight, part storm. It felt poetic somehow. A reflection of everything I'd carried to that moment. Love, loss, defiance, and hope all tangled together like ribbons in the wind. As I stood in front of the mirror, the final touches being pinned into my hair, I caught sight of the woman staring back at me. Auburn waves, soft eyes, a quiet strength that hadn't been there a few years ago. Not Lorraine, not anyone's echo, just Rain. My mom hovered nearby, adjusting the lace on my veil. Her eyes glistened as she smiled. You look beautiful, she whispered. Thanks, Mom. I hesitated before asking the question that had been sitting on my tongue for weeks. Did Dad ever say if he was coming? Her smile faltered. She looked away, smoothing invisible wrinkles in the fabric. He said he couldn't, that it'd be too hard for him. Too hard. That's what grief does. It builds walls and calls them protection. I nodded, trying not to let it sting. Okay, I said softly. That's okay. But it wasn't. It wasn't okay at all. I'd sent him an invitation months before, handwritten, with a personal note. I'd still love to have you there, no matter what name you call me by. I never got a reply. Still, as I walked down the aisle later that afternoon, the sunlight breaking through the clouds, I half expected to see him, sitting in the back row maybe, or standing just out of sight, watching. But the seat I'd quietly reserved for him remained empty. My fiancé, now my husband, squeezed my hands as we said our vows. His eyes held that kind of steady warmth that made the world slow down. I remember thinking, this is my beginning, not the continuation of someone else's story, mine. After the ceremony, as laughter and music filled the reception hall, my mom pulled me aside. Your father wanted me to give you this, she said, handing me a white envelope, the handwriting on it instantly familiar. My heart stopped. I took it carefully, the weight of it heavier than paper should ever feel. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter. It began simply, Dear Lorraine, or Rain, if that's still what you prefer. I felt my throat tighten. I wasn't sure I should write this. Every time I think about what to say, I hear your grandmother's voice in my head. She'd tell me to let you live your life. But it's hard, Rain. It's hard watching you walk away from everything that reminds me of her. Because when you were born, it felt like the universe gave me a second chance. Like the person I loved most wasn't really gone. And I held on to that too tightly. I see that now. My eyes blurred with tears as I read. I never meant to make you feel trapped. I just didn't know how to grieve her any other way. When I saw her face in yours, it felt like a miracle. But it wasn't fair to you. I turned my daughter into my mother, and I didn't even realize I was doing it. I'm sorry. I pressed the paper to my chest, breathing through the ache that bloomed in my ribs. I don't know if I'll ever be able to call you Rain without hearing her voice in it, but maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe that's how she lives on. Not through control, but through love that changes shape. So if Rain is who you are, then Rain is who I love. Always. Dad. The words blurred under falling tears. I didn't care who saw. For years, I'd waited for him to see me, to stop looking for her in my eyes. And here it was, written in trembling ink, the one thing I'd needed to hear all along. I folded the letter and tucked it close to my heart, the paper warm against my skin. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the lights had dimmed, I stepped outside into the soft drizzle that had started to fall. The air smelled of wet earth and honeysuckle. Rain. It fell softly on my hair, my dress, my skin, washing away years of resentment and sorrow. I tilted my face toward the sky and let it soak in. I whispered, thank you, not sure if I was speaking to him, to her, or to the version of myself that had finally broken free. That night, as my husband held me close, I realized that love doesn't always come the way we expect. Sometimes it comes too late, wrapped in regret and written in shaky handwriting. But it's still love, still real, and maybe that was enough. The next morning, I called my dad. He didn't pick up, but I left a voicemail anyway. Hi, Dad. It's me, Rain. I smiled softly. I got your letter. Thank you. You don't have to call back. I just wanted you to know I love you too. The line clicked, the silence on the other end strangely comforting, because for the first time, I wasn't waiting for permission to be myself. The weeks after the wedding were quiet, but in a different way than the silence I'd grown used to. It wasn't the absence of sound or connection. It was a quiet full of possibility, the kind that comes after a storm when the air tastes new and raw. I didn't hear from my father immediately. Not for days, then not for weeks. And each time my phone buzzed, I held my breath, hoping that maybe he'd call, maybe he'd leave a message, maybe he'd finally speak my name without hesitation. Then one evening, about a month after the wedding, there was a knock on our door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so when I opened it, my heart nearly stopped. It was him. He looked older somehow. Not just in age, but in weight. The kind of weight grief and time leave on a person when they carry it too long. His eyes were the same though, that familiar green, the ones I'd traced in every photograph, in every memory. Hi, Rain, he said, his voice unsteady. The word, Rain, sounded strange and beautiful coming from him. My chest tightened, a mix of relief and pain that I hadn't realized I'd been holding onto. Hi, Dad, I whispered. We stood there for a long moment, neither of us knowing what to do first. Then he took a step closer, his hand hovering over mine before settling gently. I've been thinking about your letter and about my letter, and I'm sorry for how long it took me to understand. Tears threatened to spill over, but I blinked them back. It's okay. I needed to do this for me. No, he said softly. You needed to do this for both of us, really. I see that now. For the first time in years, there wasn't judgment or expectation in his eyes. Just presence. Just him, my father, seeing me. We sat on the porch, the late spring air soft against our faces. He asked me about the wedding, about my husband, about our new life together. I told him stories, and he listened without interruption. For once, the comparisons didn't creep in. He didn't bring up my grandmother. He didn't try to measure me against someone I'd never met. He just listened. It was awkward, sure. The silence sometimes stretched, long and uncomfortable, but it was alive. It was something I'd never experienced with him before. Something that felt like a beginning instead of an end. Eventually, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small photo, one I hadn't seen before. It was my grandmother, smiling with her arms around a little girl who looked nothing like me, though I could see the resemblance that had haunted my childhood. I thought you should have this, he said, placing it in my hands. I guess I kept it for myself for too long. Maybe I needed to let go. I took the photo gently, tracing the edges with my fingertips. Thank you, I whispered. We stayed on the porch until the stars came out, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was living someone else's life. I was Rain, fully myself, sitting with my father, fully him. Two people learning how to exist in the same space without the ghosts of the past dictating every move. Over the next few weeks, our conversations became more frequent. Sometimes it was just short texts. How's your day? Or did you eat yet? But each one felt monumental. Small bridges were being built. One message, one conversation, one shared laugh at a time. I began to understand that love isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, tentative, fragile, but real. It's in the gestures that come after the storm, in the willingness to reach across a canyon and say, I'm still here. You're still here. Let's try. And in these small moments, I realized something. Forgiveness isn't a single act. It's 1,000 tiny choices, repeated over and over, until the weight of the past is no longer suffocating. I forgave him for trying to live through me. He forgave me for leaving behind the image of the daughter he wanted. And together, slowly, we began to find a version of our relationship that wasn't tied to grief or expectation or ghostly shadows. I still carry my grandmother's memory with me. I still honor her in my own way, but I don't live as her. I live as Rain, and that, being fully myself, has allowed my father to finally see me. Not as a reflection, not as a replacement, but as his daughter. And maybe that's the real miracle. It's been a year since the wedding. A full circle of seasons has passed, and with it, so much has changed, though some things have stayed hauntingly familiar. My father and I have built something delicate, something that feels like trust. Not perfect, not free from shadows, but real. I still remember the first time he called me Rain without hesitation. I was standing in our kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner with my husband by my side, when the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to pick it up. Hi, Rain, he said, his voice steadier than I'd heard in years. No tremble, no hesitation, just those two simple syllables, my name, mine. Hi, Dad, I breathed, the air catching in my throat. I saw your Instagram post from your honeymoon, he said. The one with the sunset. You looked happy. I smiled, a quiet, full smile, the kind that reaches your eyes and makes your chest feel lighter. I am. Good, he said. Then he paused. I just wanted to hear it from you, that you're happy, that you're Utah. And the silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was soft, filled with unspoken understanding. And in that moment, I realized he was finally letting go of the past, of her, of the ghost he'd held onto in me, and making room for the present. Our conversations are still cautious sometimes. We tiptoe around old wounds, careful not to reopen them, but there's laughter now. Shared memories that don't carry the weight of expectation. He tells me stories about my grandmother with warmth, not comparison, and sometimes when he thinks I'm not listening, I hear him mutter my name under his breath, Rain, with pride, not regret. And me? I'm living the life I always wanted. My husband and I have our own home, filled with light and plants and art that I've chosen. I wake up every morning and see my reflection in the mirror, auburn waves falling just the way I like them, a smile that belongs to me, eyes that hold no one else's expectations, and I whisper, I'm here, I'm me. There are moments, quiet ones, when I catch my reflection in a photograph or in the kitchen window, and I see traces of my grandmother in me, a curve of a smile, the tilt of my head. But it's not a chain. It's a reminder that she lived, loved, and left her mark on the world, and now, in her own way, she's part of me without defining me. I think about my father often, how grief can twist love into something unrecognizable, how holding on too tightly can hurt the ones we cherish most. I think about the letter he wrote and the times he hesitated before saying my name, and I realize that love, real love, is messy, imperfect, and slow to learn, but it can learn. It did. Last spring, I invited him to plant a tree with us in our backyard. He agreed, hesitantly at first, but when he dug the first hole, he laughed, a full, genuine laugh that made the soil between our hands feel lighter. We planted it together, my father, my husband, and me, the three of us leaning into the earth, letting our hands get dirty, letting something grow. I looked at him and smiled. It's okay if it grows differently than you imagined, I said. He nodded, brushing dirt from his hands. It's perfect, he whispered. I think that's what we've learned about each other. That love isn't about living someone else's life. It's about letting them grow into their own, messy, beautiful self and trusting that it will still be enough. I don't need my father to see my grandmother in me anymore. I don't need to live in her shadow or be the echo of someone long gone. I am Rain. I am myself. And for the first time in my life, my name, time, my choices, my life, all of it belongs to me. And yet, in this freedom, I found something I didn't expect. The ability to love him fully, without the weight of expectation. The ability to forgive him, not just for seeing me as someone else, but for being human in his grief. I've learned that identity is not given. It is claimed, nurtured, and fiercely protected. That names, even the ones we inherit, can be transformed into something new. That love, even when tangled in the past, can be reclaimed and reshaped. As I stand on the porch of our home, watching the sun sink behind the trees, I feel the rain begin to fall. Soft, steady, cleansing. I lift my face to the sky, letting it soak through my hair, onto my skin, into my soul. I whisper my own name aloud, not as a declaration, but as a truth. Rain. And I am finally, wholly, unapologetically myself.